And let's talk about this story that's been in the news through the past week, and it seems to be building up some steam, is the idea that there are North Korean troops are entering the fight alongside Russia. And I'm just going to read you some headlines. This is from
Okay.
NBC News. North Korean troops begin fighting alongside Russian forces as soon as this weekend. The New York Times from 2 days ago says U.S. says North Korean troops are in Russia to aid fight against Ukraine. And then just 16 hours ago, New York Times, why is North Korea deploying troops to help Russia? Newsweek just had a headline the past day. Zelensky says North Korean troops on front lines in days. So what's going on here?
This is a really funny story. I mean, when I first heard about it, I just laughed it off. And I still find it laughable in a lot of ways. We started hearing, I think it's maybe even 2 weeks ago, more than a week ago anyway, yeah, about North Korean troops in Russia. Yeah, being sent to the front lines in Ukraine to aid the Russians, as this headlines claim. Now, if you look at the sources of these stories, you find that there are two main sources. One is South Korea, and the other is Ukraine. And these are the sources that are making the claims that the Russians are going to be, or rather, the North Koreans are going to be fighting with the Russians, against the Kiev regime's forces in Ukraine. Now, I know Lloyd Austin came out with a statement just a couple days ago, or maybe it was even yesterday, and his was a little bit more careful. He said that we know that there are Russian troops in
North Korean troops.
I keep on doing that. Sorry. Yeah, we know that there are North Korean troops in Russia, but we don't have any confirmation that they're being sent to the front lines. So anyway, when I heard that, just sounded like that sounded real. It's kind of interesting that actually we tend to get more realistic statements, it seems to me, all in all, from the Pentagon. Not necessarily from their spokesman, but from from Lloyd Austin himself. Now, so what do we make of this? I have a scoop. Everyone here is going to hear this is a scoop. Our correspondent in Moscow can confirm that there are North Korean troops in Russia. In fact, in Moscow itself. She saw them today on the metro.
Oh, really?
She saw four of them, and they. First of all, she noticed, they're Asian looking. That's not weird, actually. You see a lot of very Asian looking people. There are a lot of Asians in Russia, in Moscow, but they were unusually short, and they were all wearing uniforms. And she went over and she looked, and she saw that they had North Korean flags on their uniforms.
Wow. Okay.
Yes.
So just so people listening, our correspondent in Moscow is your daughter, my sister. So
right.
That's
exactly. And now the interesting thing is that that's interesting in itself, but even more interesting is the fact that her coworker also observed North Korean troops on the metro in Moscow a week ago. And first of all, I like just today I was reading these breathless reports from the New York Times and other mainstream media sources in the West, and they're saying the Ukrainian intelligence is reporting this. You'd think that the North Koreans are kind of like they're lurking, they're in disguise. And in fact, that was a suggestion made by a lot of these reports that they're actually disguised as Russians. They're wearing Russian military uniforms, and they're trying to hide their presence. But we've discovered them. And again, this is what's being reported, in Western media, and it just shows you the absence of any kind of journalism in Russia. Because look, just every Russian, every Moscow resident obviously knows they've been here in at least for a week, because they're on the metro and they're not trying to hide anything.
right.
So I find that just hilarious in itself. Now the whole question is why are they there? I don't know. I don't think there's it doesn't. I can't see any reason for them to go to the front lines. I mean, the Russians are getting 30,000 new troops every month. They have hundreds of thousands of troops in reserve, in the SMO region. Why they would need 10,000 or so North Korean troops, it doesn't make a bit of sense to me. Maybe there is some sort of special role, or that they can perform. I don't know what that would be. But it would create a lot of problems, I would think, for the Russians. Others have pointed this out, like Brian Berletic. It's just that the most obvious one is that they don't speak Russian. And the Russians don't speak North Korean. And I mean, the communication is so important. Korean, right? There's not a North Korean. So, it seems like it would not at all be helpful. And again, maybe there's some specialized roles, but I don't think they're going to the front lines. I don't think there's any reason. They're clearly there, confirmed by our correspondent in Moscow, your sister. But they're not trying to hide it, as a lot of these reports have suggested. She said that she saw, 4 of them, on the metro, and they were in their uniforms, but they were clearly off duty. I mean, they had kind of like personal backpacks and clearly very relaxed. They were probably just, exploring Moscow. So who knows? I mean, it's nothing strange about North Korean soldiers being in Russia. That's something that we should have expected. The two countries have a mutual defense treaty. So it's just quite natural that there would be some that would come for training or, for any kind of discussions. Who knows?
That was very recent, though. That was about a year ago when that mutual defense treaty, or was it?
No. I think it was much more recent than that. It was just a few months ago that was reached.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Okay, I knew that there was talk of, when they went over there to try to get artillery shells or something like this. Is that true as well, the artillery shells?
I keep on hearing that. It's just never been confirmed. It might be. There's been a lot of hysteria about that. I find that story much more believable than a lot of the other stories, because that's something apparently that the North Koreans can make a lot of. And it's something that it's very important to this war in Ukraine. The Russians are outproducing the West at a rate of close to 10-1, when it comes to artillery shells. But they say, hey, sure, if we can get a couple million more, then we can make it 20-1. Why not? Again, it hasn't been confirmed. I don't see, why it couldn't happen. I think that's certainly very possible. The stories about the missiles and so on, again, there has been no confirmation, and I don't just see why. I think, again, the Russian missiles clearly, they're not lacking for missiles, either in quality or quantity. Why would they want North Korean missiles? The only thing I could think of is that the North Koreans asked them to test a few or something in combat conditions. That's a possibility. But again, we just don't have any confirmation, and I don't believe it. And why there should be any hysteria about North Koreans selling artillery shells to Russia. Well, it's the rules-based international order. Again, we make the rules, we give the orders, and the orders are that nobody can sell any munitions of any kind to Russia. And we can sell billions or give hundreds of billions of dollars to Ukraine. Those are the rules. How dare you try to break them? It's kind of even silly. Like, there's stories that Iran has supplied different weapons to Russia. And, the Iranians have denied this. It's just, but why even deny it? Who cares? Again, it's just like, don't even show any respect for the rules-based international orders. Who cares about their orders? It's just the whole thing is so obscene. So anyway, there are North Korean troops in Moscow. At least 4 of them. I think both times 4 were observed.
Sure, much more.
We don't know if they're the same 4, probably not, but who knows? And what it means, I don't know. I highly doubt. I cannot see the reason for sending him to the front line. If the Russians are sending him to the front line, they must have some reason, but I don't know what it is. It seems like it would only cause problems for them. First of all, it would be difficult, in fact, impossible to integrate them into the troops that they have there already. And then second, it gives the West an excuse for sending foreign troops into Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that seems like the play, clearly.
I think that's why they're making this,
right,
creating the story.
drum up the support and the justification for sending in actual NATO troops because Russia is calling in North Korea. And I think it's also just the fact that it's North Korea paints a really kind of scary image. North Korea, it's interesting because North Korea has just been so isolated for so long. Just the idea of seeing North Koreans anywhere is like seeing a super rare Pokemon, super exotic creature. You just don't,
Right.
North Korea has been completely isolated, completely closed,
Right.
and you think that the only people that get out are the people that escaped, because of just
Yeah.
we just hear these horror
Right.
stories, and I believe
Yeah.
that it's
Yeah,
horrible.
a lot of the horror,
completely.
especially in the past. I don't know what the present situation is, but I know that life in North Korea was really wretched, and in fact, there was a serious famine that killed millions, I believe. Certainly hundreds of thousands, and that was well anyway. But I don't know what the present conditions. I know that they're quite a bit better, but I don't really know what they're like now. I imagine like having like these troops that are taking the metro in Moscow are having the time of their lives, or it must be an extraordinary experience for them too. It's like going to another planet.
Right, right. I mean, they're completely closed off from they have their own intranet, right? It's completely closed off. Everything is isolated except for some South Korean pamphlets that get dropped on them. And apparently, North Koreans are dropping trash back on South Korea, so
Right.
little tensions there. Yeah, it's. I just feel. I wonder how Kim Jong Un is probably ecstatic that he's no longer completely isolated. That he's opened
Yeah.
up
No,
now that he
it's a
has
real
this
breakthrough for
relationship.
him.
Right. So, what do you think this just means for the future of North Korea? Do you think we can start to see the less of this iron grip on North Korea? We might actually see North Koreans taking vacations to Moscow, not just military troops, and that it can start to become part of the real
Well,
world again.
I think so. I think so. I mean, the fact that there were just four of them on the metro is an example of that. That was impossible. Now these four guys, apparently unsupervised, are just are just exploring Moscow. And yeah, Russia is a very big country. Maybe the rest of the world is off limits to them. But if North Koreans are allowed to explore Russia, or at least to go to certain places in Russia, I mean, that's a big step forward. And I think we could see a continual, kind of loosening of the grip, as you put it. And that's good for North Korea, and it's also good. It's good for Russia too.
Well, what about just South Korea? The whole idea of unification. Which can you tell me a little bit about the current? Because it's a frozen conflict, right? It's never been resolved. We just have this demarcation separating, and the South Koreas, they're always they're the good guys, and objectively so. You look at their economy and their growth. I have been to South Korea multiple times. It's a great place. I haven't gone to North Korea, but there are trips. When I was in China, I knew some people that did trips to North Korea. Very guided tours. But is there's this? You think this idea that what is it? Does the North feel like it has to take the South, or does the South feel like it has to retake the North and unify, and there be one Korea? Is that the situation? Do both have that stance that there is going to be a reunification?
Yeah, my understanding is they do. Just like, in fact, Taiwan officially, I should say the Republic of China officially has that stance vis-a-vis China. Though the DPP, the Democratic Progressive Party, which is the independence party in Taiwan, is clearly moving away from that and going, away from unification to real independence. But, that's a side issue. I don't know so much about Korean politics, but yeah, that's my understanding, is that both of them believe that Korea needs to be unified someday. Not too long ago, there were real moves towards, improving relations. Past presidents of South Korea have been much more active on that front, have had that as part of their policy, was to try to improve relations and actually achieve peaceful reunification. The current president, I understand, is really kind of a neocon, or he's in alliance with the neocons, I should say. And and is kind of has clearly taken, embraced the globalist cause. So better than a year ago, there was news that the South Koreans had sold some hundreds of thousands of artillery shells to Ukraine. They kind of pretended they didn't do it. They sent them to the U.S. who then sent them on to Ukraine. Clearly they had, and that's something that greatly angered, Russia, because Russia actually at that time had good relations with South Korea, with both North Korea, and I think that's part of what led to, the Mutual Defense Treaty with North Korea. It's just that before, the Russians may have been reluctant to take that step because they wanted to maintain these good relations with South Korea, but the South Koreans ended those good relations by joining the hostilities, against Russia. So now, you get all this hysteria from South Korea. Frankly, who should they blame? They should blame themselves. They stupidly, took sides in a war that had nothing to do with them, and now they're suffering the consequences.
Do you think the South Koreans are getting a little bit worried that with this mutual defense treaty between Russia and North Korea, that that things might turn against them, that North Korea may try to retake the South? Is there some saber rattling? Is that an actual possibility?
Well, the thing is, there's just always saber rattling there, especially from the North Korean side. So it's hard to tell, what's rhetoric and what might have a little bit more substance to it. It's certainly, what I would say is that it should extinguish any dreams of South Korea or, together with the United States, retaking North Korea. Obviously they can't do it if they have the Russians supporting them. I'm sure that the Russians do not want the North Koreans launching an invasion against South Korea. And I'm sure that that may have been like kind of preliminary to the Mutual Defense Treaty. It says, like, you guys aren't going to do that, are you? Right. And if the North Koreans in fact did attack South Korea, it's a mutual defense treaty, so Russia would not be obligated to help them. That's typically true of such a treaty. So I don't know if it really makes any much of a difference, as far as North Korea attacking South Korea. But if anybody had dreams of attacking North Korea, I think those are gone. Any notion of that is going to be off the table.